Well, today we got Valentine down there under the computer desk and got several books here to go through. Now, let's show you the first one here while I'm just talking, so we have something to look at. Frogs into Prince's Neurolinguistic Programming by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. Now, last time I spoke about Dick Sutphin, who was one of the major influences in my life. He really was the first to explore a lot of past lives through group hypnosis. And he was really big into self programming, a lot of those things. And he's the one that introduced me actually and I even had a seminar, a 12 cassette tapes seminar of hypnotist training seminar where I wasn't actually able to be at a seminar, even though I did go to one seminar of his while I was in Phoenix, but this one was purely on tape and it was very, very powerful. I learned a lot about it, but the subject of hypnosis is what we're talking about because neurolinguistics programming deals with hypnosis. Now, I've spoken of Dion Fortune, and Dion Fortune spoke about a lot of occult principles and stuff and how they actually used hypnosis in various ways. For example, in one of her stories, she's talking about how they would use a trance medium or whatever you want to call it, and they would put them in a trance and use them as a telephone to talk from one lodge to another. Who really knows what hypnosis can actually do? I have a story also. When I was in the Air Force and I was in basic training. I got done with the basic training and I was going into the job training where you have your actual job that you're going to be trained for. And the sergeant that was there, for some reason, we'd all been talking, it was a group party, a graduation party. We were just done with the training. And it came out that I had actually done some hypnosis. I'd been able to hypnotize people. And the sergeant, he says, "That's all bullshit, baby. You can't hypnotize me." And I said, "Well, yeah, whatever." And I really tried to brush it off, but he said, "You think you can hypnotize me? I order you to go ahead and hypnotize me." And so I counted him down, I hypnotized him. I had him believe there was a parrot on his shoulder that pooped on his shoulder then, and he was brushing it off and stuff like that. And then I left him with a suggestion, a post-hypnotic suggestion that said, "You're going to forget everything that happened here, except when I say the word barnyard, you're going to bark like a dog, and then you'll forget everything. Also, forget that also." And everybody else is just kind of looking around and staring and stuff, and it was kind of scary because I could have got in a lot of trouble for hypnotizing a superior officer, basically. But he'd ordered me to do it, and I was trying to be as safe about it as possible. So everybody just had big eyes. They were watching as he was, "Oh, there's a parrot on his shoulder," and then it pooped on his shoulder, and he's trying to wipe it off his uniform. And then he woke up and, "See, I told you you couldn't hypnotize me," and whatever. And then I said, "Yep." And then I mentioned the word barnyard and he barked, burp, burp, and then that was it. It is amazing what when you're talking about the occult and you're talking about magic and you're talking about hypnosis and you're talking about altered states, it's very difficult to make distinctions and find where the lines are because what I've learned about hypnosis is we don't know what hypnosis is. We don't know at all. We have just started in that. Now there is a person that lives in Brainerd in the town that I live in. That actually I was talking to him one time, and he had taken international training, master training, whatever you want to call it, for NLP. He was a NLP trainer, international NLP trainer. And he talked about the training that he had received. And he said that the graduation ceremony that they had gone through in New Mexico was a small class or whatever, but they'd gone through in the graduation ceremony, they had to walk barefoot through a long a path of glowing red hot coals, and harmless, have no harm, don't feel it or nothing like that. And he told how the whole class did that, and there was only one person, and it was kind of at the end of the line or whatever. They freaked out, and they got severe burns and ended up going to the emergency room. But literally everybody else made their way barefoot through those burning coals, those glowing coals, and he was saying it felt like walking through cool moss. So I have the experience, not of first-hand experience of walking through red hot coals barefoot, but of talking to somebody who says that they had. And I asked them, I was very curious. I said, do you think that you could do that now? Do you think, or do you think it was the belief of the whole group that allowed you to do it? Do you think it was like something that you could do as individual, or was it the group energy? And he thought that was an interesting question, but he thought it was the group. He didn't know if he could do that on his own. That was NLP, and that's what we're talking about here. Now, this is the first book. There's a lot of these books, and I'm just going to kind of maybe look through and see a few examples here that kind of show what you can expect. You see that image there? Well, look at what it says. Visually constructed images, up to what you're looking up to the right. Eyes focused and unmoving also indicates visual accessing. Visual to the right, visual remembered eidetic images. One's constructed or imagined. One to the right is the remembered, or the AC, auditory constructed sounds or words. Constructed, imagined. Auditory remembered sound or words. Kinesthetic feelings, also smell and taste. Auditory sounds or words. Is there a difference between the eye movements people make when they're remembering something that they've heard in the past and when they're trying to imagine what something would sound like? When you say imagine, that presupposes images or pictures. Ask them to create a sound they haven't heard before. That will be a difference. Yes, discover that for yourself. So anyway, there's another. They gave an example of. Okay, think of a traffic light, and is the red light at the top or is it at the bottom? And then you look at the person as they're trying to answer, and what they're going to do is they're going to look up and to the right because they're visually remembering seeing a traffic light before. If they get it right, if they make a guess, and so what's happening literally is just by talking to somebody, you can tell if they're telling the truth, or whether they're making something up, just the way their eyes look when they're processing that question. That was just one example of some of the things they go through. Now, each book here has some different things. If I find some places, I would kind of show them up, but I'm giving some. I have some examples right straight out, but okay, yeah, I'm just going to go on to the next book because this is a whole series. Transformations, Neurolinguistics, and the Structure of Hypnosis. Let me see when these were first published, out of curiosity. '79. Started out in '79, in the '70s. Look at the table of contents here. Simple inductions, verbal pacing and leading, nonverbal pacing and leading, overlapping representational systems, accessing a previous trance state, naturally occurring trance states, exercise 4, anchoring trance states, advanced inductions, overload, stacking realities, process instructions, reframing, Okay, this is not really getting into what or I'm not finding some of the things I did. These are actual books that are taken from seminars. I'm just going to read this first page here. Introduction. This afternoon I want to spend some time teaching you reframing, an approach that you can use with hypnosis to deal with almost any difficulty. I also want to teach you how to arrange explicit yes and no signals, because if you know how to do that, you can go through any procedure in a trance and get accurate feedback as you do it. But first I want to give you some background. How many of you have ever had a client with hysterical paralysis or something like that? Many people think it's uncommon, but it's not. It's an interesting problem. When I first encountered hysterical paralysis, I was fascinated by it. I had read that Milton Erickson had taken hysterical paralysis and moved it from one part of the body to another, and I had always wanted to do that. When I finally got a client with hysterical paralysis, I decided to try something similar to what Erickson had done. I hypnotized her and moved her paralysis from one arm to the other. She walked out being able to use her left arm, which she hadn't been able to move for 3 years. However, her good right arm was now completely paralyzed. I was delighted and had her come back the next day. She was somewhat perturbed at me because changing her paralysis made it obvious to her that her paralysis had a hysterical quality to it. Before that, no matter what the doctors had told her, she knew that the paralysis wasn't really in her mind. The doctors kept saying, it's in your mind. And she knew it was in her arm. Okay, so there's a kind of an example of what they're doing. There's one that I've used a lot, I've worked with a lot, and I'm not finding here, so I'm just going to tell about it. It's called listening. It's basically listening to the type of verbs that a person uses. When a person has vision, there's three ways of primarily accessing information: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And according to the verbs that a person uses, you can tell which type of processing they use. For example, if somebody's saying, I see what you're saying, how can you see what somebody's saying? But seeing means it's a visual verb. They process visually. They'll also say things like, "That's very clear to me. Uh, I can't see it," or something like that. Okay, auditory. That rings a bell. I hear what you're saying. Tell me more. Or all of these verbs, when they're using a lot of verbs with the auditory component, you know that they process auditory. Kinesthetic is feeling. And when you get somebody that says, I just can't get a grip on it, or that just doesn't feel right, or that moves me, or something like that, these are clues that this person primarily uses kinesthetic verbs for processing his information. And if you want to have a conversation, a connection with them, what's really powerful is to match this type. If they're using visual verbs, you go ahead and use visual verbs and you'll find rapport. If they're talking about auditory things, use auditory verbs and you're going to get that rapport again. The same with kinesthetic. These are things that neurolinguistics processing talks about, as well as reframing. And they can literally do things that you would say are almost miraculous with just the reframing, the way that they phrase words. Another thing, I'll give an example that neurolinguistics talks about. When you tell a little child or something, be careful or you'll fall, or be careful or you'll hurt yourself, that's not right, because to understand what you're telling them, to understand what you are saying, that child or that person has to literally visualize themselves getting hurt or visualize themselves falling or whatever it is, and then trying to put an X through it, trying to say, so that doesn't happen. And whenever you mention something like that to that child or that person, you're planting the seed for failure, you're planting the seed for getting hurt, you're planting the seed for falling, because they have to understand that before they can put an X through it or not do it. So it's extremely powerful how you frame certain words. And this whole science that we're talking about that goes along with hypnosis, but it's not really hypnosis, is what people are using when they construct narratives. It's what the mainstream media is using when it's working with narrative, and why it's so important to have certain people believe certain things. Now, those are the three basic Neurolinguistics Programming books, but there was more that came out. The Imprint Method, A Guide to Reproducing Competence. Leslie Cameron Bandler, David Gordon, Michael LeBeau. A mental aptitude patterning book that just goes further and further along. I mean, we're talking about this is a science. And it's a science with word creation. It's a science with hypnosis. It's a science with mental programming. Very detailed. Guided programs for inventing your own best future. Extremely powerful. One of the things that I kind of am hesitant, while I'm aware of it and I use it to a certain degree, I've kind of deviated from this because I never felt comfortable working with hypnosis or suggestion directly around other people because I felt it was a little too invasive. And there's something inside me that just, I don't want to control people, I guess. I have an aversion to that. But I recognize when it's being done and how it's being done and how pervasive this type of manipulation is. The thing is, by using words properly and phrasing things properly, you can almost do miracles in programming yourself or somebody else in a certain way. But that doesn't mean it's permanent change, because just as quickly something else can come around and program you in a different way. So it's really, I was looking at something that deep, long-term permanent more than something like a quick fix like this. But recognizing that this happens. Solutions, practical and effective antidotes for sexual and relationship problems. By the same thing. Can you convey passion, intimacy, love, tenderness? Do you know how to use the touches, tastes, sounds, and signs of lovemaking to have more profound and beautiful experiences? A tremendous audience of NLP adherents has been waiting for solutions. The book that takes a demonstrated contemporary psychology beyond the therapist, delivering it to the hands of anyone committed to being well and happy. Written by a co-developer of Neurolinguistics Programming as a guide for sex therapists. Solutions is a set of simple and reliable techniques used to remedy couple and sexual problems. Now, before I continue on, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the first neurolinguistics books and neurolinguistics as it stands today. After neurolinguistics was out there for a while, they got into some serious legal issues, or one person or a few persons got into serious legal issues by abusing that, allegedly, with taking advantage of some of the people that were going to them for help and support. Not only that, a lot of the things that I really thought were key and thought were important in today's books, if you want to study neurolinguistics, they're no longer in the curriculum. Probably because they were too powerful, or because they got in trouble with them or something like that. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that I I have a friend. I talked to somebody who has gone through the NLP courses recently, and they were nothing like. He didn't recognize the things that I was sharing from the first three books. There was more about programming and certain things like that. But the whole neurolinguistics was based on the work of Milton H. Erickson. And I have some books by his too, Advanced Techniques of Hypnosis and Therapy. Selected papers of Milton H. Erickson, and another one, Mind Body Communication and Hypnosis, the seminars, workshops, and lectures of Milton H. Erickson. And I remember, it might not have been in these books, but there was one book I had that they were talking about how if you go and reach out your hand to shake somebody's hand, they automatically reach out their hand to shake yours. And what happens is if you go out and reach your hand and then you pull it back really quick before you shake their hand, their mind kind of shorts out because you broke the pattern, and they go into a hypnotic space where you can put in a suggestion, a hypnotic suggestion. That's one of the things that Milton Erickson experimented with, and there was an example where he did that to somebody. He reached out his hand to shake it, and the other person reached out their hand, and then he pulled his back right away, and he said, "Meet me in 2 hours down in the parking lot." And then he just turned around and left. And sure enough, 2 hours later, down in the parking lot, that person went down there to meet him and didn't really know why. And when you think of today's world and you think of the barrage of advertisements and brainwashing that we have in today's world, it is absolutely amazing. And then you think about how the human brain is so suggestible. It's really frightening. It is kind of frightening, but and it is, in a way, is very magical. Now, the last book I'm going to have here jumps out of that, but it's somewhat related in a way I didn't know where best to put it. The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. In this, Julian Jaynes, really it's the next quantum leap beyond what Sigmund Freud did. A lot of people are they believe that way. It's very it made a splash in the world of the study of the mind anyway. But he claimed that back before the invention of reading and writing, the gods or voices spoke to people and told them what to do. And they had a genetic compulsion to obey what they were told. And this was just the way that the human brain works. It's highly suggestible, and it would come up with these voices in the head. And it was the gods telling these people what to do and what not to do. And then with the creation, with the invention of reading and writing, for the first time, people had to create an inner world, like a visual creation, or where they would not only have an inner world, but also they would have to have people in that inner world. And instead of everything became more visual, if you will, and the ability to hear these voices began to go away. Now, when you look at, I tend to use visual verbs if you notice that, but when you think about modern society and you think about how everything's politically correct, or how everybody's starting to be echo chambers of each other, you begin to get an idea of how dangerous some of this is, how suggestible things are, and why narrative is so absolutely vital and important for these people that really want to control and manipulate the masses, because they understand just how the brain actually works. So that's kind of why I was bringing up this a little bit. And if you think back about what I talked about with voodoo and how possession, how easily, in that video I was talking about how this one lady that was exploring her voodoo roots mentioned a young girl walking across the compound being possessed by the spirit of a dead rooster. And you think about all these New Age channels who are coming out and they're channeling or being possessed by these channels or whatever. It really kind of makes you question and wonder, what kind of world are we living in? Anyway, that's enough for this video, and I'm going to just let you think about that. Anyway, neurolinguistics programming, very powerful.